Yay, thank you. Kevin Joyce, everybody. Give it up for that suit. Shelley was going to color it in later.
It needs to be a washable marker, and then he takes it home and washes
Yeah.
it, and it comes back white.
For the people watching from home, Shelley Tolo said it needs to be a washable marker. I promised them I would repeat what people say when they're not on the microphone. Because I'm told that we've got 2 or 3 million people watching from home right now. Hi. All right, so we're going to start with introductions. It's funny, Kevin's job was to introduce us, and then my job was to introduce us, but I'm going to let us just self-introduce. So I'm Fred Northup Jr. I'm a fundraising auctioneer here in Seattle, but I travel around the country. I do about 80 to 100 events a year myself, and then I've got a team of 4 auctioneers, and I help with all of the things. And so here we go, our official panel.
Hello, I am panelist Alex Martin. I use she and her pronouns. I live in Seattle. I've been planning events for nonprofits for like 24 years or so here locally. My business is Synchronicity Events. We're gonna do about 40 events this year, mostly in person in Seattle, but a few hybrids and live streams as well. I'll leave it there for now.
Good afternoon. My name is Gazala Uradnik, and I own GFS Events. We're a full-service event management company, and we specialize in nonprofit fundraising events. And we do a variety of events, mostly in the Seattle Pacific Northwest region. We have a few events in different parts of the country, and then we're doing fewer live stream and hybrid events, but maybe there'll be a couple of those this year as well.
Wow, your pacing of your speaking was so excellent, Gazala. I'm going to try to follow that. I'm Shelley Tolo, Tolo Events. I've had the business now. This is year 20. Prior to that, I was Director of Development of Major Events for Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. I do have a master's degree in nonprofit management that I only mention in sessions such as this, but, you know, that was a long time ago, too. Our company used to, like 85% of our business used to be nonprofits exclusively, probably until about 6-7 years ago. We really started doing a lot of corporate work, too, so we have a nice combination of events, and we primarily do them here, but we do have a lovely portfolio of clients in Pennsylvania. That's my home state, where I started the business, and in California.
Lovely. We're going to start by asking you questions. We want to know who we're talking to. So we figure that there's, we've got nonprofit employees, we have nonprofit vendors and suppliers, from photographers to AV companies. We have nonprofit event planners like those on the stage. So let's start with that. So who here works for a nonprofit?
Hey.
Ooh.
Hey, Judy.
All right. Who here is a vendor or supplier who maybe wants to work with more nonprofits? Awesome. Ooh, okay. For those of you watching from home, you'll just have to imagine the hands going up. Who here is an event planner? Look at this. All right, awesome. And so obviously we've got some overlap as we have event planners within the nonprofit world and all of that. So we've memorized everything we saw. All right, so let's talk about why we're here. So it seems like our nonprofit events, we talk in terms of pre-COVID, and COVID events and post-COVID. So before we talk about the future, I want to look at the past and ask you, what are the constants that we've seen carry from the beginning to the middle to the end? Gazala, you've got the microphone.
Okay, yes. So I was thinking about this morning, and I came up with, I think, three ways that I think are kind of post-COVID or pre-COVID to post-COVID, what kind of stays constant. The first thing is engagement. I think that whether it's pre or post, nonprofits want to engage with their community, and their community wants to engage with the organization. So I think that is really, really important, and that hasn't changed. I think that personal connection is the other thing that is constant as well. So I know that I was one of those people who I think during COVID thought, well, maybe virtual events is the new thing. Like maybe we're going to be here and we're going to do virtual events forever, and we're doing a hybrid event today. But I realized really as of last year that it's that personal connection that's so important, and we we needed that personal connection when we were sitting at home and we didn't have the option to go in and meet people. But now that we can, it's that personal connection. And I think that was valid back then, and it's going to be even more valid in the future. And I've forgotten the third thing that I wrote down.
You wrote stewardship.
Stewardship, thank you. And so many of you are nonprofits in the room. You know that is the other really important piece. And a lot of times, some of our clients have that, if you build it, they will come approach, we'll just make a gorgeous gala, and we'll do all the wonderful things, and we'll have a wonderful auctioneer, and we'll have great food and all this, and then people will come and they'll give. And sometimes that works, but it doesn't always work. In fact, it really mostly doesn't work. You have to connect and talk to and steward your donors and your community before they get into the room. I think that was very, very valid before, and it's even more so now, that you need to have the right people in the room, and you've got to make sure that you're connecting and engaging and stewarding them along the way, before your event, after your event, during your event, all year long.
Anything to add about things that are the same before as they are now, or should we move on? I want to make sure I always give you two a chance to respond. All right. So then let's talk about the future, because that's why we're here. We get to predict the future. And so I'm talking about what has changed. What changes have you seen that are necessary post-COVID? And Shelley, I'm wondering if you have any stories, for example, of clients who are doing either everything the same to their detriment, or people who have drastically changed, or whatever.
Yeah, so in our clients, I'm going to say we have a little sprinkling of everything. So we have some of those who have not changed a thing, to my sadness, and really came back doing exactly the same thing, which I frankly wouldn't advise, and I'll circle back around on that. We've had some that have come right out of the gate saying we're going to change, some for really good reasons. Like organizations, like I'll give an example. I was talking about Pennsylvania, but Pittsburgh Humane Animal Rescue, they used to always do their event in a convention center or in a hotel ballroom, right? They didn't want to go several years without having an event. They were super concerned, out of sight, out of mind for donors, right? If you lose that connection. And they realized, wow, we have property at our shelter. Like, could we do a tented event? So August of 2021, they called me because I love to do events in tents. In fact, Kevin has written a song about events in tents, but we won't have him do that now. But they had a chance, they had the property. They're like, we're going to break our contract with the hotel. They walked away from their deposit. I know that's scary for nonprofits, but just because you have a deposit that's been transferring over year to year, if you need to make a right decision, you walk away, right? And so they've had like record-breaking events now at their shelter, and they know it's the right place. People can tour the shelter, see their mission, etc. I do have one coming up that after 67 years of having a gala in a ballroom, we're blowing it up, and that one I'm really nervous about. So next year, I will talk about Temple Health's gala that's coming up the end of mid-May, like literally blowing it up.
Right, because there's, I think
we are going from ballroom to, let's try to have 50, well, they already have like 1,200 people, but we are going to Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia and having a rip-roaring party, still trying to figure out how they're actually going to raise money at the event, but I still have 2 months to figure that out. But they're going to do well. They raise a lot of sponsorship dollars, but when you have such a big venue, so much fun.
Yeah, and to me, I always think that I don't think that people should just make more money the next year for the sake of making more money. I think that you have to have a clear vision that you can communicate to your donors about, this is how much we need to raise in order to do this, because that's a compelling thing. And then it becomes a math equation. Like you look at, you've got your Excel spreadsheet out or your Google Sheets, and you figure out, okay, if our ticket sales are this, then we're this percentage of the way there. And so if you're going to blow things up, then you've got to build things up somewhere else. You can't just blow up across the board. It's just math, So what else? Anything else that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say we do see a lot of groups trying to re-envision the format. In fact, an event I did last night after walking around here, when I did a great event, and they had, even last year, post-pandemic, they did a dinner, sitting down at the rounds, and then this year they did mix and mingle format, and then sit down for a presentation, theater style, and then come back to the mingle room for dessert. And people were kind of going wild. Like the guests were like, "This is so different. We love it," because they got to visit with every single person they wanted to see. They weren't trapped at that table for an hour and a half. I know we trap people, right? We like sit them down and we feed them this program, and they got to eat their courses when we tell them they get to eat. They can't have seconds, like, and when you free them up and they get to just like bounce around, have food, have drinks, they're actually really happy. I don't know how happy people, like, it was nice to see a whole room of like 150 people looking really happy all night. Because when you picture your banquets or your luncheon, like, what's on people's faces as they're watching your program? Do they look thrilled, right? So it was just great to see that. Oh,
Well,
yeah.
and I'll just add, and then we'll get to your question, that's one thing I saw during COVID is, as we were all doing virtual fundraisers together, is that we realized we can make a lot of money in a short amount of time. And so I think that realizing that we can be efficient in our storytelling and then make the event fun, because I always quote you, Shelley Tolo, where you say, we are selling tickets to next year's event at this year's event. And if this year's event isn't fun, it's going to be really hard to get people to come next year. What was the question? You can yell it out and then I'll repeat it. The event that you just described where people were seated in rows like we are here, how long was the actual presentation?
40 minutes.
Did it make money?
I was just going to say, what we're doing at Citizens Bank Park is it's dinner, roving around concourses, playing, having fun, trying to get people into the seats in the ballpark for a 40-minute thing. We're also targeting 40 minutes. That's the biggest thing. Things post-COVID must be shorter. Must be shorter. Must be shorter.
Yes.
Yes, agreed. I will add to that, we did something similar to that. The event exactly started as a gala, so it was supposed to be a gala. We shifted it around completely. It was for a group, school group organization, and so I should say youth group organization. We had it at Stadium High School in Tacoma, and that's where the event happened. And instead of doing a program with, a typical event, we had spoken word, we had tap dancers, we had all these things that involved the students and the kids. It was longer than 40 minutes, but people were engaged. There wasn't, and it was and the beginning portion wasn't, the typical like silent auction and cocktails and things like that. There was no alcohol at the event at all. It was mocktails because it's a school, and people stayed, people engaged. It was very, very different from a typical event, and we've done more than one event like that. Like more people, I think, more organizations are feeling like we need to do something different.
I wanted to answer the question that was asked. Did it make money? I love the question. I would say this particular event was not about like getting people drunk and tricking them out of money. We didn't, you know what I mean? Like some auctions, no offense, Fred, some auctions
You're
are like,
speaking my language.
let's get people drunk and see if we can trick them out of some money. And I find that when you do that, people aren't necessarily coming back for more because they're like, ooh, that was kind of like a bad date, right? Like we want to build relationship. We want them to come back because they're passionate about our mission. So this event was funded much more so by sponsorship and by gifts that had been arranged in advance. And a very small, maybe I'm going to say like 5 to 10% of the budget was intended to be raised by surprise money, right? Like who's going to be moved in the moment and contribute? Because it was a pretty small event, like 150, which is small for us. And most of those gifts, we already knew that they were coming in. So just wanted to.
I do want to add that my goal is not to trick people. My goal, certainly I love people to have wine and have a great time, but my goal is that we tell such a good story that people are moved to give and want to give. I think giving is a choice. I don't ever like to feel like we're strong-arming people. I want people to be so inspired to give. Ghazala, you talked about how the numbers of people in the room are going down. I'm wondering, is it still possible to make as much money? And again, this gets back to my point of where I'm like, tell us why you need to make as much money in the first place. But is it possible to make money with fewer people in the room? Because I know we've both been seeing numbers tick down.
Yeah, I would say that we're seeing anywhere from 20 to 30% less people in the room for over the course of the last probably 7 to 8 months, the latter half of last year too. And but the fundraising has either stayed the same or increased. In most cases, it's increased. And I think it's because the organizations are spending time on the right people. So getting the right people, the people that are in the room are actually wanting to give. And then, and to that point, we're also trying to do things outside of just the live auction, just the silent auction. So what can we do to engage individuals in the mission before they walk into the ballroom? And there's a couple of examples I have. We had one client where we did these really fun games. Instead of, they scrapped the silent completely, and they had made a lot of money on the silent, but it was also a lot of work, and they scrapped it completely. We did instead these, what they call the brain architecture games, and they played these games, and it was all about childhood development. So then the speaker, when the speaker came on stage, who talked about, was before the ask, was able to tie the games that everyone played out in the cocktail hour to why they were here that night. It was super powerful, and they made way more money than they had on any of those silent auction items, and people understood why they were there. They weren't there to buy baskets and trips and things like that. They were there to support this organization.
Yeah, I did an animal shelter pre-COVID where they got rid of the silent auction, and instead they had 3 pods that represented the 3 pillars of what they do. And if you visited all 3, you got your check mark on your passport, and there was a drawing to win a dinner. But they made the most money they'd ever made in the Raise the Paddle because people walked into the room understanding, oh, I didn't know. I thought they only did adoptions. I didn't know they also did X, Y, and Z. So I love that. I love storytelling. And I think the storytelling even begins, obviously, as you said, before they walk in the door, too, and the communications and everything else.
Yeah, speaking to that, I'm starting to see people share their Fund a Need video in advance of the event, right? So it's part of the communication. So that's something from during the pandemic, you would start to put communication out throughout the whole week, 2 weeks leading up to the event. And I think it's something that we still want to continue to do because they're not, number one, they're probably not going to remember that they are watching it a second time. But it, again, sets the stage for what they're there to support.
Can we talk more about, or do you want to add something first?
Yeah, I love that the event is a campaign, right? There's a campaign. If it's 10 days in advance or 2 weeks, and the live event, the in-person event, is a wonderful jewel in that. But you're reaching many more people. We know that, right? We know thousands of people might see social media about the event. But only 100 are in the room with us. Like, don't forget, like, you're bigger than just that room.
I was going to ask you, since we're seeing fewer people at events, and it's hard, I'm sure there's a myriad of reasons. I think that some people, after going to no in-person events for a few years, are now being selective about the ones that they attend. And so, as you said, we're selling next year's tickets at this year's event. What should nonprofits be doing at their events to make sure that people want to come back the following year? Yeah, to everybody.
Be unique. Make it yours. It's your story. Don't look at someone else's event and be like, we want to do that. No, dig a little. Do you, because your organization's amazing, and it shouldn't look or feel like anyone else's party. I don't think.
That's a good one. I would echo that. I would say that the thing that I find when people leave and they want to have fun. They want to have fun in the room and at the event. And the fun doesn't necessarily mean like entertainment, and it is about the storytelling. I mean, there's a lot of events that I've gone to where I'm like, the fun was like the impact that everyone in the room is making that night. That was the fun part. It wasn't just like, I won this wonderful auction basket or whatever. So doing something that's storytelling, really engaging the community in your mission throughout the event.
All right, so I'm going to go totally superficial here. We don't have a single client left anymore who's requiring black tie at their event. So I think being more casual goes sort of to the more fun, more inclusive, don't have to spend money to go to the event because I have to wear a particular outfit. So I think that's part of it as well. I know I was also going to say make it yours. So we always talk about, like, if you're a zoo, what can only you do? If you're the opera, if you're the symphony, hint, hint, people who are in the room, what is it that only you can do? Like, the opera can have opera performances. Like, the zoo's not going to have an opera performance, probably, right? But the opera is. So that is unique to the opera and how it helps to advance the mission of the opera, or, whatever. So it's, if you're the zoo, you bring out the cute, well, maybe not cute. They could sometimes be snakes, which are terrifying. But, you want to bring out animals and show that if you're doing how you treat animals who might be injured, those are the things that you want to try to explore. You can do that a couple ways. If you're in a ballroom and you can't bring in a snake, is there an auction item that you can create that is unique to you? Like, those are important things.
Yes. I love auction items that are unique to the organization. At Marybridge Children's Hospital, there's a cart that rolls around from room to room with games and iPads for the kids. We auction off, you get to have your name on that cart. You're the sponsor of that cart for a year. And hopefully you'll never see that cart, But it pulls at the heartstrings and it reminds people why we're there. So.
Oh, I was also going to say, I love coming to things like this because then you get to steal ideas from other people. I just recently, it was the American Heart Association. I'm just going to tell you who it was in Pittsburgh last weekend. I was in Pittsburgh, and they actually got a sponsor for their Open Their Heart. That's what they call it, but they had an Open Your Heart sponsor. And what I thought was brilliant about that is that the money that they had from that sponsor helped to pay for a really excellent video. And I hadn't really seen somebody sponsor that portion of the evening before, but I thought it was really interesting and meaningful. And it wasn't a match either. It was a legit corporate sponsorship.
Do you all have more examples, since the future of fundraising, I think, means that they have to be efficient in their storytelling and leave lots of room for fun and be very unique? Do you have specific examples of events or something that happened at an event where you thought, well, this is really unique and fun and is kind of driving home who this group is?
I have an example of that. This is a client that is a animal sanctuary, and so what we've done in the past, and they had stopped doing this for a few years, and they brought it back. We recommended we bring it back. So again, no silent auction. But during the beginning portion, we had what was called the marketplace, and we had 4 different, almost like pods. What somebody said pods, almost like a convention kind of feel, where you had a booth, and in each booth was a specific program for the organization. So we had pigs and goats, we had kittens, we had, and each at every single station, there were 3 identifiable ways to give and what that money would go for. So it was for $25, you can help this XYZ, help so-and-so organization do XYZ. So it was very specific, and they had 3 or 4 different options. And then people in their packets that we gave them, they had a card, and everybody had to fill out that card. We required that card to be filled out, and that was passed out. So it usually brings in anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000. And again, it's the program people in the room talking to everyone. So that's all they're learning. They're not doing anything else except for having a drink and learning about what the organization does. So I love that. That's the way I think every event should go, because we spend so much time, I know you both do, on just talking about auction items and all these other things that just honestly don't matter when it comes down to it, and it's about what you do that matters.
Yeah, and I would say let's go with show, don't tell. As you were saying, anytime you can actually show the work. One of my favorite events every year is the event we do for Food Lifeline inside their massive warehouse where they store all the food. And luckily they have this massive square footage where we can have hundreds of people. They takes them a day to clean out the warehouse and make it not smell like rotting onions. But then it's wonderful, and we move in and we make a beautiful event. Kevin has been at that event for Food Lifeline. Thank you, Kevin. over the years, and Sasha as well. Sorry, I'm making my shout outs here. So I love that because we're showing people the behind the scenes, like here's how the forklifts move the bins of food around, and here's the cooler that holds, 5,000 pounds of everything. And then another one I love is when people show their values. So not just showing like practical things, but for instance, if you're a youth development organization, I really believe you when you have a young person as a host or co-host of your event, right? When you show me that like your 13-year-old has that poise and they're ready to be in the spotlight, it's like, oh, you have developed these youths, like this is impressive, right? So like instead of talking about it, we're actually revealing the excellence of the program. So just a couple examples of like, oh yeah, what do we have? Let's find a way to reveal it in the moment. Anything else, Shelley?
So, what should vendors know about nonprofit events right now?
I was
terms-
gonna,
yeah.
I was gonna start with this one just because of a conversation I had recently. So a couple of vendors in the room, just for you all to know that nonprofit sector has had lots of staffing turnover. So I was talking with a photographer, and she happens to do a ton of beautiful event photography. And I said, if you're trying to get back those clients from 2019, you need to call them because the person you talk to is probably 2 jobs away by now, right? Because we're seeing like development directors about a 15 months, this is recent data, right? 15 months tenure in that position. And that's the person we're always connecting with. That's our point person for fundraising events. So, that's 2 cycles. There is no institutional memory from 2019 or 2020 at this point. So she was really glad to hear that. And I just wanted to point out to anyone in the room that you're like, oh, or even if you're like, oh, they didn't like me, they didn't book me, call them now because they don't know you. Like, call them, help them out.
Yeah, just sort of along the same line, just a really interesting conversation that I had just with a client recently. They're all new except for one. And the conversation started with, hey, I just want you to know that before we started planning this year, the question came up because we were really trying to watch the budget. Like, do we really need an event planner? And I love this conversation. It did end with you're worth every penny we pay you. So that was the good start, but right. But it was, organizations are really watching their budget. So, and with that, everything is more expensive. Rentals are so expensive. Labor is so expensive. So you're just not going to be doing your event for the same price you did previously. And so just take that into account. I think the price of eggs has come down, so maybe food, but everything, all the pricing has gone up, right? So just to echo, you need to make sure you're out there reintroducing yourself. The cool thing, though, about if you do have really long-standing relationships, like this past Heart Ball was my 19th Heart Ball. I was able to introduce this new executive director to some of their major donors, which was cool. So that's why he saw the value, right? Because I know these people, I can give them 19 years of history. So there is value. This is where the plug for us. Consultants who are with organizations a really long time do become really a part of the family and get to know donors through the years and have some consistency even when staffing changes.
Yeah, I would say that for 75% at least of my clients, I've been doing their event the longest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that for many organizations, as you said, it's completely new. It's not just the development director, it's the development associate, it's everybody is new, as we come back. You were talking, Ghazala, about getting the right people in the room, but I know all of us have had a lot of conversations in this, especially talking about the future of nonprofit events around equity and inclusion and how that manifests itself in events. And there's this push and pull between raising as much money as possible, but broadening the reach into the community and all of that. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, can you raise a lot of money and be equitable and inclusive at events? And how do you marry all of that together?
I'll start, and I know Alex is going to chime in on this. What we're seeing is a few of our organizations are looking at the community-centric fundraising model versus the donor-centric model, and have done things like, for example, tiered ticketing pricing. So rather than saying that's $200 to attend the event, $150, whatever the case might be, you can actually pick your price. And you'd be surprised when people are asked to pick their price, they actually pick a a pretty reasonable price. Like they're not trying to like be like, oh, I want to go to this gala for $5. But that was for me, that was a revelation. I think that was really exciting to see, and we did a variety of different tiered pricing because for this particular organization, and it wasn't a gala, so it wasn't like it was a big sit down dinner. But for this organization, it was all about inclusivity. They wanted to, they did not want a single person to be left out. So if anybody had come up and said, I'm here, what is this about? You were welcome to walk in the door. And it was a very large fundraising event. I mean, it was a large fundraising event. We actually broadcast it. It was wonderful, and it happened in the fall. So we're seeing that. We did that with the one I mentioned about Stadium High School. That was also the same kind of a thing, a tiered model. So I've seen that, and then Alex and I were having this conversation about just the donor-centric versus community-centric. So donor-centric, like, I gave you this amazing auction item, and now I want to tell you exactly what you're going to do with it. You're going to put it in the live. You're going to make it number one. I mean, all those kinds of things that donors demand of organizations like all of you have probably had in the past. Just trying to get away from that. I don't have a way to do that, but I think that organizations are realizing, like, no, we're going to do what makes sense for our organization, and not just because you gave us this item and you told us we have to do this. So I think we're easing towards that, but I don't think we're anywhere close.
I know how to do it. You don't have auction items. That's the only way. So we try to avoid transactions whenever possible. We want to build a relationship. We want that donor to be, I'm sorry, I'm going to cry. We want that donor to feel the mission that you have, to have learned, you've revealed yourself and your excellence, and they're like, yes, I want to be part of this. I don't want to just throw money your direction and you put my name on a screen and then I come back next year and we do it again. Like it's got to be better than that. Sorry, I'm off track. So that's how you do it. You take the transactions away. So anytime I'm trading you something for your money, throw that away if you can. It might take you a couple years. I used to say, let's get that auction down to the size we can drown it in the bathtub. It might take a couple years, get it down to like 5 items, 1 item, and then it's gone. Or it becomes a raffle, which is more inclusive because everyone hopefully might be able to consider the price of that raffle ticket, right? So we've eliminated transaction, and now we can just focus on the philanthropy, like that white hot vortex of philanthropy where people are like, yes, I want to be part of this. And not just like I'm giving you money, but I'm in your community now. So community-centric means everyone gets to come in. It means a lot of things. It means we don't say the name of donors that are giving the most. That's a hard one, I know, because we're all accustomed to like, oh, top billing for the top sponsor. Maybe all your sponsors get on the same slide all together, and they have their logos at the same size because that $500 gift from the local coffee shop actually means more than $50,000 from Amazon in terms of the budget of that little business, right? So like, how do we make it like everyone's here equally, everyone's showing up, and as Ghazala and I were chatting about right before the session, like the $100 gift from a donor actually might mean more to them than a $10,000 gift from another donor sitting right next to them. So how can we make everyone feel like they've contributed? That to me is community-centric. The baby steps towards it, if you haven't done the whole community-centric reinvention of your org, I think is to just eliminate some of the most harmful things, right? So look at things that you're doing that might be like placing a hierarchy on people, right? And if you can eliminate any of those, then you're going in a good direction. I'll stop now.
Shelley, have you seen those conversations happening? Or
Some. I mean, a lot of ours are like really mega big $1 million plus fundraising galas, and that's a little bit harder to tackle, right? So, but I always say that if it makes you sort of feel uncomfortable, then it's probably going to make your guests feel uncomfortable, right? And I think it gets back to, again, the stewardship of the donor in advance. And I think the symphony did this. They asked for all of their gifts in advance of their event. So now, if you wanted to give while you were there, there was a way you could give, right? But they got all of the fundraising out of the way. That sounds horrible. They got all the fundraising, though, out of the way before the event, so the event could just be a celebratory, really engaged donor engagement type of thing, which I think is a really interesting concept of doing. But I also think depending on how you switch things up, the donor you need to have a strategy of paying attention to all of these new donors, right? I had a mega donor one time share, and I was like, wow, that is such good advice. I like locked that in, but was talking about, because when you're very large, most passionate donors come to your events, they're hopefully filling their table with people who they want to share their passion about your organization with their friends, right? So he mentioned one time about how important the $1,000 donor is, particularly if you don't know that person who just gave you $1,000. If somebody shows up at your event and gives $1,000, or for your organization, maybe it's $500, right? It's a larger donation and you don't know them. Sometimes $1,000 donors can just be sort of like, oh, it's $1,000 donors. If you're like in $1 million plus event, right? If somebody just comes to your event and writes you a check for $1,000, they can probably write you a check for more than $1,000. So it's about really paying attention to people who have just because their guest in an event came and made a significant donation, and for me, $1,000 is significant. So it's having that follow-up strategy after is just as important as having an event, giving at the event. If you ignore them the rest of the year, they might not come back.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously as an auctioneer, I would not get rid of the auction, but even pre-COVID, it's funny, pre-COVID, I was the auctioneer who was known for, and I've got some people here that I've worked with, there was the auctioneer who was pushing to have fewer live items. And even yesterday I was on a call and I was saying, I don't want so much heat on the auction. The auction should not be what's responsible for fundraising. The auction should just be the fun icing on the cake, because there are sadly going to be some donors who are transactional. I see them at every event where I can sell someone, I see them bid up to $10,000 on a dinner, and then at the Raise the Paddle, they give $1,000, because they haven't moved past the transactional donor. Hopefully they will become the philanthropic donor. But I love, 2 or 3 auction items. And because then it's entertainment, it's fun, but the real focus is on the paddle raise and hopefully the storytelling, the storytelling and moving people emotionally. Moving on. As in many parts of our economy, the nonprofit sector is seeing high levels of turnover. You talked about that. We all talked about that. How can we support people? Are there specific things we can do to support nonprofits, all of us in the room, during these moments of transition and turnover and everything else? I mean, we talked about institutional memory and all of that, how we provide that, but is there more?
I'm going to stick with institutional memory. No, I think it's really just, I think coming from our perspective, we're consultants, right? So we're in the business of working with our nonprofits, but we've seen some of our nonprofits have an issue or for a while, everyone was going out on maternity leave. So it was like they're short staffed because somebody's out on maternity leave or somebody left. But I think all our nature is to just sort of jump in and fill the gap. So again, if you have those external partners, and I think no matter whether you're a consultant or you're a rental company, or I know we have auction banking companies in here or software companies, everyone I think just by the nature of the nonprofit world, we all want to help each other.
I have something. Yeah, go ahead. I just want to say, take time to explain everything, because, especially an event that maybe we've done for 3 or 4 years, and client does their part, and planners do our part, and vendors do their part, but suddenly the client doesn't know their part anymore. They really don't know it. So even if you're coming in just as a vendor, but taking time to explain exactly what you're doing and why, because that person, again, even if they came through other nonprofit and this isn't their first rodeo, this is their first of this rodeo, they and their team need time. So we're just doing more meetings that feel like, okay, here's what you need to bring to the table. We're just really laying that out over and over again and taking time with it, so it's not a surprise and no one feels burdened or confused or angry about the extra work. It's well, no, this is kind of what you have to do in order to show up with those name badges merged and those the thing that they need to bring. So
before we open it up to questions, let's talk about younger donors. How do we appeal to younger donors? Do they have different expectations around events or fundraising or anything? What are you seeing?
So I asked this question of my team, who is made up of Gen Z in their 20s and then a few millennials as well. And it was an interesting conversation because I think the first thing that one of them said was, I don't want to see you being the nonprofit waste money on stuff. Like, don't waste money on these fancy brochures and fancy things like that. I want to know that if I give you money, it's going to what I want to help, who I want to help. So whether it be people or animals or whoever, that's where I want the money to go. So that was an interesting piece. And then the other, and somebody else said, I just don't know if my money matters. Like I don't have money, so can I give $25, right? And I'm like, well, you can absolutely give $25. And I think that's going back to what Alex said, is like, that means that you as nonprofits need to make sure that the person who can give $25, because that's a lot of money to her, like, right? That potentially is a lot of money to that person, is just as valued as the person who gives $25,000. So I think just making sure that you know that younger donors are interested, they want to help. And then what I'm seeing too is a lot of younger donors want to help. If it's not monetary, they want to do something else. They want to be able to be involved. They want to somehow be involved and somehow feel like they're helping and participating, whether it's on a board or whether it's in a committee or whether they're just coming in to help and stuff envelopes, whatever the need is.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing I've taken from the community. What I've read about community-centric fundraising is I have seen groups locally who had kind of young donors, kind of the under 45, under 40-year-old donor programs where you had to give $1,000 a year or more to be a member. I've seen them shift towards that you just have to be involved. Time is obviously just as valuable as money, and so broadening the ways that people can engage beyond just pure cash. All right, we should open it up to questions. I'm going to run over. I've got a microphone because there are people watching. The 2 million people. Hi.
Hello to the whole world. So sticking with the topic you were just discussing around younger donors and cultivating them and getting them invested in our work as nonprofit organizations. I was actually just listening to a podcast called The Ethical Rainmaker, which I'm sure some of you have heard, and they cited some studies that said younger generations, talking about millennials and Gen Z, have polled that they show more trust in corporations and brands than they do in nonprofit organizations. And that tore my little heart to shreds. And so if this is the pool of donors we're currently cultivating, how can we use events to instill that trust in nonprofit organizations?
That's a good one. That's a good question.
I'll just add that there's a woman named Janie Williams who was a big fundraiser locally, and she always said to me, people don't just give money to great ideas. They give money to people who can execute those great ideas. And so having, a lot of brands have this, but having a passionate, motivated leader who doesn't just get up and say, hi, thanks for coming, but really shows vision and passion, I think is important, regardless of the age of the donor. But yes.
Well, that's a great question, Sasha, of course. Thank you.
Yes,
Bring in
Sasha
the hard
Cousineau,
stuff.
everybody.
Yes. So I just think, at your event is kind of a chance. I always kind of joke with people, like, if we can really produce the heck out of this event, we're showing your excellence. And people will trust that you're good at the other work you're doing. They must be good at running that food bank program because they're super good at throwing this party. They're actually pretty much unrelated operationally, but we're proving excellence, right? We're showing. I think that the question to me is, how are we going to get those folks in the door in the first place? Right? Because, of course, once they come to any event that I'm a part of, they're going to be so impressed, right? They're going to be like, wow, this organization is awesome. But before they get there, I feel like someone has to invite them. And so it's like building those connections. So that's where we kind of, again, come back to that community-centric piece where, oh, hey, are you a volunteer? Hey, we have a volunteer prize for our gala. Let's make sure you get in. And we don't just make you work all night. You actually, because you volunteer all year round, here's your chance to come and bring some friends, right? So someone has to invite them. And I love it that Young is under 45 now. Wow, that makes me old. So we're cool, we're fine. We're just processing that in the back of the mind while we continue talking. But I love that. Young, we're kind of young. But yeah, they have to be invited. And of course, you all know this audience development. It doesn't happen via email. It doesn't happen via social media. Those are good reminders. But a human being that I respect and admire has to invite me in. So that means you have to make sure you have some table captains who are younger than me. Otherwise, you're not reaching, you have no individual getting that actual invitation. Yeah? Logically? Okay.
So last weekend, the auctioneer who we hired was from Kentucky. My client hired an auctioneer from Kentucky. He was actually great. He's been their auctioneer for many years. But in knowing this was a question on today's panel, I asked him, because I think sometimes, not sometimes, things are different in different parts of the country, right? Not what Seattle is doing is not what they potentially are doing in the South or the North or New York City or wherever. So I asked him about younger donors and what he was seeing, and he actually said, so I'm going to tell you what he said, and then I'm going to extrapolate what I think he probably maybe meant. But he was seeing younger donors being being a little bit more transactional, but not in the fact of like buying auction items and things, but like they like a brick. They want to put their name on something, and I think it gets to, they want to know, I think, more specifically what their money is doing. I think that's what he was trying to say. That's how I'm interpreting it. So whether, you can zone in to like, it's a scientist and a research, and this is what it costs to do whatever, or we're a homeless shelter and it costs us this to outfit this room every time we move someone on into permanent housing. Now we got to redo the room and it costs X. I think that's what maybe younger would be appealing to younger donors, because it gets back to, I want to know exactly what you're doing with my money. So I think when you can dial that in, and I know sometimes you try to do that on like the Raise the Paddle, at this level, you could buy whatever. I think it's more than that. Because that maybe is a way to trick people into giving money. But anyhow, I think it's how can you visually show people, perhaps during the cocktail party, about like, hey, this is actually what it costs. I remember way back in the day, way back prior to Tolo events, when I worked for Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. I can tell you back then I knew that it cost $16,000 to buy a NICU bed at that time, because you didn't, and we would on occasion bring a bed to an event and help people understand that this piece of amazing technology that's going to save a baby's life is 16 grand, right? But it associates something very specific with a dollar amount. And I think people would rather see the very, very specifics than to have this more general sense of what it might be.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes. I'm coming your way.
What are some things that nonprofits are doing at events that you wish we wouldn't do anymore?
Silent auctions, all together again. Say it with me, silent auctions.
Okay, but I'm just here to stir up trouble. Are we okay with an online auction that happens and there's no items in the room? It just happens maybe during that campaign? Just asking, are you okay with that?
I'm okay with it. However, it still takes up so much energy. You have board members who should be filling their tables, who should be doing way more stewardship with their donors and their community, and instead they're like, I got this $50 gift card. I'm so excited. And it's like, fantastic. And so that energy that is spent on the online auction is just as big of a time suck as a silent auction.
And I will say, even prior to the pandemic, there was I'm not going to name them, but there was an organization in Seattle who was a client of ours, who their like president of the foundation, number one, he hated events. So he was like, what can we do to get rid of the silent auction, Shelley? I just want to get rid of it. So we actually did. He was willing to take the risk to see if that money transferred over to the Raise the Paddle moment. And you know what? It did. They didn't raise less money because they didn't have an auction item. A silent auction. The following year, though, this is where you have to do what's right for your organization. The committee complained that there wasn't enough to do during cocktails, that they brought back a silent auction. Well, they should have said no. And this is what I would also say now, post-COVID, make your cocktail hour actually an hour. and not 90 minutes. And then you don't have to fill people's time so much, right? They come in, they register, they get a drink, maybe they're buying some raffle tickets, and ballroom doors open and in you go, right? It doesn't need to be this 90-minute thing. And then your hours-long dinner and auction, and then, it doesn't have to be that anymore. If you can fill it with amazing entertainment and fun and a great time, you go for it. But I think particularly if you're struggling with your budget, having the bar still be open till 11:30 just might not be the best use of your dollars.
I have another one to not do. I would really love it if everyone could not spend time giving an award to their big donor. Like that's, you know what I mean? Like back to that community-centric vibe of like, oh gosh, now we took like someone made a speech to introduce the person, then they come on stage and make a speech. We give them a weird shaped thing of glass that has their name on it. Like how did we learn anything during that time except this person is really rich and they made a big gift? Like, you know what I mean?
Do not ask people to give during the Raise the Paddle in honor of somebody who just got an award. It's awkward. If you don't know that person, it's awkward.
You got another one? I do. I'm still back in the silent auction. I think we have.
Yeah, the only time I am okay with the silent auction is if it's like a school and they've got like a 20-person committee and they've got 10 people who. But even at Fred Hutch Gala, which pre-COVID did $12 million, it was the same conversation. The Guild loves a silent. They insisted on procuring some items, but it didn't affect. It was the development department was not a part of it at all. It was just, it was there. I agree. I always I want people, the right people in the room, and sponsorship. All of that. Silent auction is the least important to me. Anything else? Oh yes.
Hi, so my question, I work for a nonprofit venue, and it's hard to switch between corporate and nonprofit clients. So my question for you is, how do you guys feel about budget transparency in communication with nonprofits? Because we are always trying to understand, as a nonprofit ourselves, that nonprofits work within budgets.
That's a great question. I just want transparency when we communicate with a venue. We don't say like, oh, well, what can you do? What price? It's like, here's our budget. This is what we can do. I know, and I go back to so a lot of our nonprofit clients, oddly enough, don't have a budget until we come on board. I don't know if you have the same, but it's like, I'm always like, what's your budget? What do you want to raise? That's a good question. So have a budget in mind, and then let's be transparent with our vendors. That goes back to how do we communicate with vendors. I go back to our vendors and I say, here's our budget. Here's what we've budgeted for, photography, for auctioneer, for videography, for MC, whatever the case is. Here is what it is. And if you can't meet it, that's okay. Like, I don't want you to reduce your price just because we're working with a nonprofit client, and you shouldn't. I mean, we're going to go somewhere else then, right? We're going to potentially go somewhere else. But I think having those conversations and asking, what happens a lot is a nonprofit wants to just see, well, how low will you go? Like, if I just keep asking, will you go lower? Will you keep going a little bit down so I can maybe book with you? And I just think that's just a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah, and we were chatting about this. I've always had the philosophy, particularly on our end, I would just go beyond me. I don't think on your marquee fundraising event, you should not be asking for anything for free. It is a waste of your time. You want to build relationships with vendors so that you can ask them for something free later if you need something free. Thank goodness I haven't heard this in a while, but we did have some clients through the years like, do you think we could get the flowers donated? Like 80 tables of flowers? Like, no. Like, a florist actually has to keep the flowers alive for a week. There's actually a whole process with regard to that. But you pay for your flowers this time, and then if you have a lovely donor stewardship event and you need a lovely bouquet, that florist would love to give you a lovely bouquet for something in the future. So it's always just build the budget and abide by the budget, and then it should all work out. And build your budget both ways. Like, here's the expense, but here's also how we're getting the revenue to get your path to goal.
And I also want to say, I have some nonprofit clients who don't need your discount. Like, they would be happy with the corporate rate and won't push back. Also, I think if you have hopefully a neutral third party like an event planner, on your, in the middle to like be honest with you about like, hey, you know what, this group, just shoot me over the full cost. And then with another group, we might call and say, gosh, this group is kind of scrappy, grassrootsy. Can you offer your nonprofit discount, right? So I think it's nice when you can actually have a frank conversation about what does this group need, either money-wise or just like, hey, hit us with your full price and we'll run it up the poll and see if it flies. We don't know.
And as you pointed out when we were talking, a lot of the vendors who are being asked for discounts are themselves not, like small local businesses. And so it's nice when the nonprofits are excited to support local business instead of trying to nickel and dime local business.
Yeah, my favorite question is, do you offer a nonprofit discount? I'm like, I only work with nonprofits. This is the discount. It's just, yeah, they're always asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my contract, it says, this is our nonprofit rate. They don't know, there's not another one. Like, this is the nonprofit rate because I only work with you, so we're good.
All the way in the back. Look, you can use your own microphone. Hold on, wait for it. Now it is.
A little over my head of a very established auction for an amazing company and organization, what they're doing, that does silent auctions, silent auctions, almost live, and paddle race, all at the same time. Well, not the same time, but the same night. Suggestions, thoughts, helpful hints on slowly getting to the bathtub stage potentially. I can see, especially because a lot of the donors that I'm sure that are on that list are not going to be around for a long time. In a nice way to say that.
And is this is the first year you're doing this?
Yes.
I mean, I think one thing that we've done, especially when we go from year to year, is just showing them data. So like, okay, here's your silent auction. In fact, Sasha and I were on a call this morning. It was sort of like eye-opening. It's like, here is what you raised on your silent. Here's what you raised on another piece that was about like a fraction of the work. And that raised more money, right? And then here's something else that you did, which was also a pain in the neck, and that raised hardly any money. And I had exactly this conversation with a client this morning. And so showing them the data, I think, really helps to say, like, you have all these items. No one really wants 3 chiropractic massages or whatever, the teeth cleaning and all the things that you get in your silent auction that all the committees and people get. So I think showing them that and showing what works, what doesn't work, and where the money is, and the ROI, because that's the other part. Is like, okay, if you spent 80% of your time and you made 10,000, is that really worth doing for next year? What can we do with that time? What can you do, and how much more could you raise?
Yeah, and sometimes it's baby steps. I know when we're working with a client for the first time, like sometimes we just need to observe. Like there's only so many things you can suggest to get them to change in year one, but data is totally it. And we actually have a client this year who is going back to bidding on paper. And Debbie, do you have any data on that from Greater Giving? But anyhow, I'm like, really? And they're like, oh yeah, it was the same conversations we had years ago about, oh, well, people are too focused on their phone. I honestly, I'm sort of excited to see what happens, because honestly, I think they're gonna raise less, but I don't have the data to say, you know what, if you go back to paper bidding, you are gonna raise less. So I'm gonna let them do their thing, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm curious to see if maybe it's not. I have my doubts, but anyhow. So I would say baby steps for sure. And if you can get a board member or someone on board as well that can help support what you would like to convey, that's always helpful. Or I think it's good to be a master at turning your ideas into somebody else's ideas. So that's the key. Like they mention it because they're repeating something that you just said, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's such an amazing idea. We have to do it.
I don't dislike paper bidding, I'll just say.
Yeah,
out
I
loud.
don't. We have a mutual event. I don't dislike paper bidding either. I actually do like it. I have
Yeah,
to say.
me too.
Yeah.
Just don't use sharp pens.
I haven't seen paper bidding for so long. We're mobile. Well, and I think it's the post-COVID thing too. Like, I'm not going to send people in there elbowing each other out of the way to get down to the bid sheet. You know what I mean? Like, if they have to duck under someone's armpit to get there, it's like, oh God, I don't want to do. They're going to be touching the pen, licking it. God.
I also, the
BYOB.
other thing I would add is sometimes I give people just goals. Like I'll say, if you're gonna have a silent auction and a live auction, the total number of items, I want it to be 10% of the number of guests. So if you're gonna have 400 people, then that's 40 items. 5 of them will be in the live, 35 will be silent. The thing I selfishly sometimes like about a silent is it gives me a place to put an item that isn't good enough to be in live or shouldn't be a live item. But yeah, sometimes just giving them number goals can help too. What other
Thank you.
questions are there? Yes, I'll go you and then you.
Hi, I'm the event coordinator at Food Lifeline. So Alex, I'm sure we're going to talk about this during Dress Down Hunger planning season. So one thing we've noticed, like as you guys talked about, like it's better to keep things shorter, especially post-COVID. But with our organization, we have so many different departments and so many stories that we want to tell during these events. So sometimes we struggle trying to find a balance. Do you guys have recommendations about how you can potentially stretch that storytelling throughout the entire event, even in the cocktail section, instead of like just during that seated program?
We love this question because it's all about activations. But also, don't forget you have a campaign going. So you can tell me a story in your social media on Tuesday, and then as you're reminding me about the event on Thursday, you can tell me a different story. Like I can take it, right? I can take lots of stories in my brain, and I'm learning about different programs you do. And then at the event, I show up and I see, tables with activations and activities to do that tell me even more, reveal even more about those programs I learned about. And then maybe your big fundraising video is on a totally different, but of course related topic to tell me something else that I haven't learned yet, right? So it's great to have lots to tell.
Yeah, and to go off of that, you can also tell stories that are kind of like I've seen this with some clients where we continue the story. So maybe a little nugget on Tuesday, and then the continuation on Thursday, and then the reveal is on Saturday when you're coming into the event. So kind of telling that story, and as Shelley mentioned earlier, you can send out your information ahead of time, keep the campaign going. We had a client who did a celebration, just like you had one, and the amount of money that was raised was before the event and after the event, but not at the event. And so just being able to kind of carry, it was basically like a 6-month campaign with a celebration tied.
This was actually I hate that we're saying pre and post-COVID. AD, BC, okay, so anyhow, this was a pre, though. It was a Fred Hutch Gala. I loved it. We set up these mission moments at the bar lines. And we had scientist stations, and we rehearsed with the scientists to tell their story in 1 minute. So while you were in line waiting for your cocktail, you got a little spiel from the scientist who had we tried to have them, there was like a video there that had a couple of visuals, but like if there was a particular piece of equipment, they would share exactly what this equipment did. So I always think that that's fun, like where it's unexpected because, you're in line for a bar and to get a drink and there's a scientist that you can talk to. So I think that's really cool. And I think visually showing someone something at an event, I try to picture when we're designing events, experiences is, there are groups of 10, but there's also like an individual or 2 people that might come. And I want to find the space for that individual or that couple who's come to an event and help them feel welcome and warm and like fitting in when they might not know anybody else who's there. So I think by having some visual things that people, particularly if you're eliminating the silent auction, what in the world would people do during cocktails if there wasn't a silent auction? But I think that if you have some visuals there where people can walk up, learn about your mission, visually see something. Like we did, Liz is here, she produced an event. It's one of our clients that has, it's a women's and children's shelter. And so they wanted to show like, where do their typical client, where do they come from? Because they're out in Snohomish County. So you sort of think like, oh, there's homelessness in Snohomish County. So like, where do these women typically come from? And it's like, either a shelter, or they might have been living in their car, or they might have been living at someone's house on a sofa. So those were things we wanted to show where people were, where their clients came from prior to that. So I think if you visually see things or set things up in the bar line, could be a fun way to tell more stories without actually having to do it in the program.
I'm realizing it's 3:05.
Oh, yeah, that's right, and there was a car. We yeah, brought the car in and we made it, well, I wasn't there. Liz, did you make it messy? Yeah.
It looked like, there was a living room set up. I'm couch surfing, and there's a 1998 Camry that somebody's living in with their kids, and there's these different things so you can actually put yourself in that experience.
I think we need to cut it off. Can you ask your question one-on-one? All right, we're going to do that. All of us, we have cards and websites, so reach out to all of us. We would all love to continue the conversation. And so how about a round of applause for your panelists? And we're sticking around, so come up and say hi. Thank you, everybody.